Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this session run by Wellbeing Australia. We're extremely excited to have you all with us today. We have a wonderful guest this evening, Simone, who will be having a discussion with us on coaching conversations for well-being. So we're so thrilled that you can join us for this evening's session. Just before I hand over to Simone, a couple of things about Wellbeing Australia for those of you who don't know much about us. We're a not-for-profit that's been around for about 10 years now, and Wellbeing Australia is different in a number of ways. The first is that we are focused predominantly on prevention of wellbeing crises and on giving people the skills, the abilities, the knowledge, and the tools to proactively manage their own well-being before they reach a point of crisis. So there are outstanding organizations, as you all well know, that deal with people in crisis. We love the work they do, and we believe very strongly in partnership with them. But where we tend to focus is a little bit further up the line before somebody needs to get to that situation, where we really focus on prevention and proactively getting people to understand their own well-being and what goes into that so that they can proactively manage it. We're also very focused on solutions rather than on describing the issues. So you'll hear this evening that Simone will focus a lot on what are the solutions, and that's really how we like to bring the skills and knowledge to you all. Another way that we're pretty different is that we are fully funded by members, and so we don't have any agenda. We're not trying to sell any particular approach or specifically a philosophy, a psychological theory. We really believe in a multidisciplinary approach to well-being. And so for some of you, that would be around the medical model of well-being, but for others, it might be more focused on spirituality or social well-being, etc. And the third area I really wanted to focus on is that we believe in 5 aspects of well-being. So we'll focus on a few of those this evening, but we believe that well-being is about more than just an emotional well-being or psychological well-being. We also believe very strongly in the physical importance of well-being and how your physical health and fitness contributes to that. But apart from those two, there's 3 more aspects of well-being that we really find aren't very well discussed generally and that we like to focus on. And those are spiritual well-being, regardless of your spiritual views, and it's certainly a non-denominational well-being aspect. But we believe that your well-being is very closely tied to your sense of values and ethics, whatever those may be. The other area is financial well-being, which I think we all know that as soon as finances aren't looking good, our well-being seems to suffer exponentially. And so we believe fundamentally in financial well-being, and that's not necessarily wealth, once again, but your ability to afford the lifestyle and the things that you would like in life as per reason. And the last one is social well-being. I think we've all learned in the last few years how important social well-being is to our overall well-being and our sense of belonging, our sense of communities where we feel that we can contribute, but also share views, share interests, share hobbies with others is really important. So that's a little bit about Wellbeing Australia. I urge you, if you'd like to know more about us, to go to our website, which is wellbeingaustralia.com.au. And we would love to hear from you. So please subscribe if you're not already subscribed and consider becoming a member. Excellent. Well, what I'm going to do is hand us over now to Simone, who is going to be speaking with us this evening. So over to you, Simone. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody who's joined. And I'm here in Canberra, so I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on here, which is the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay my respects to their elders and to any elders or emerging leaders who may be listening, on whichever land that you are on. So I'm really thrilled to be speaking today and tonight, and also then we're going to have some Q&As, which I'm really looking forward to. So I have a little presentation, which I know that Donna is going to put up for me as we go through. So just a little introduction about me. I am here in Canberra. I have had a long career in private and public sector across from HR. I've actually also been a teacher earlier in my life, and I know there are lots of teachers who are part of Wellbeing Australia. And I recently also then have completed my Masters of Science in Coaching Psychology through the University of Sydney. So I've started my own little business, which is called Citron Consulting. Please feel free to have a look at my website. I have lots of tools, and I make those available because that fits within my philosophy as well. So if we might be able to pop to the next slide. Thank you. So I pulled together just a few of the main theorists that influence me, and I've actually put this together into a document that I made available, a few documents for those who would like, based on the Wellbeing Australia's website. And so there's a little bit more detail listing a lot more theorists who have been really influential in wellbeing science. So if I just really quickly run off a couple of them, and you'll see then in the work that I'm doing that why these ones are so important. So the first is, we'll go past them. Anyway, if we might be able to just pop back, if that's possible. Great, thank you. Subjective well-being, it's really important because that's what Donna was just talking about, which is the good life. PERMA, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with, which is linking those positive emotions and engagement, social relationships, the meaning, achievement, and also health. Self-determination theory, again, really important from my perspective, because it's about autonomy and competence and how someone themselves can drive for that to satisfy their needs. Keys has put together a lot of work in social wellbeing, and I think that's really important about the social coherence and connectedness of people. Ulrich with the psychoevolutionary theory, I'm very keen on this, the restorative influence of nature, green space and blue space, and salutogenic theory, which is about linking health and that sense of cohesion. So health being not just something you do for yourself, but it's part of your community, your family. Thank you. If we'd be able to pop to the next slide. Thank you. So I wanted to also bring in some of these concepts about well-being that we're seeing a lot of. I'm seeing a lot in media, LinkedIn posts and so on, but it's really about psychological health and safety in the Australian environment and how that's actually different. So psychosocial risk, how it's different from psychological safety. So really just a high-level framework. Psychological health and safety is the application of a risk framework here in Australia. So there are psychosocial hazards at work, and there are control measures which include well-being, but they are about job design, org design, and so on. Psychological safety is a group level phenomena where it's about people interacting, building those trust, not being punished for speaking up, being encouraged to step forward. So they are quite different because it's about psychological health and safety is the prevention of a psychosocial risk, injury, and psychological safety is about increasing innovation and creativity. So if we might be able to pop to the next slide. Thank you. So one of the topics that Donna and I talked about that I know everyone's very keen to hear a little bit more is about well-being and spirituality and how they fit together. So there's some great recent research coming out of the University of New England, so here in Armidale, which is about the relationship between gratitude, well-being, spirituality, and meaningful work. So what we know is that having gratitude will help to foster happiness and contentedness and a sense of hope. It can also lead to mastery and growth and life's purpose. We're more likely to be able to forgive and have that collective community, which is the pathway to meaningful work. There is also a view of actually reducing individual narcissistic behaviours. How that links together is with spirituality is intrinsic beliefs and extrinsic activities, where an increase in spirituality will lead to a sense of thankfulness, positivity, and gratitude, and having again that everything in life has a purpose. And so my very dodgy little picture here, which is the spirituality gratitude, meant to show sort of a bit of a yin and a yang, because they're related, so that, you know, is it that spirituality comes first, gratitude comes second, or gratitude and spirituality, they're constantly related with each other? So if we could pop to the next one, thank you. So just some stats, because I know there are lots of people here who would probably like some stats. 80% of workers say well-being is their top priority, but 90% feel that their work life and their balance well-being is getting worse. There's a nice little wheel here from some of the Australia's wellbeing data. And also the World Health Organization defines the symptoms of burnout as experiencing persistently over a period of time high levels that affect our physical, mental, and emotional well-being. So we're hearing a lot about people talking about burnout, and that is cynicism, exhaustion, and inefficacy. So I've got some links down there where there's some data. So if you'd like to have a little bit more data, please feel free to have a look. And Danae, be able to look. Thank you. So I've been doing a lot of work in moving the conversations and trying to start looking at well-being from a coaching perspective, and trying to look at how has our world changed? What does that mean? What's different? So I've taken that two-dimensional focus that we've all well familiar with the wheel of life, and now starting to look at it as a compass. And so a compass has many areas that move, and if you start to look, it's about how do your thoughts and your feelings and your experiences interact together. They interact physiologically, and looking for where's your true north. Then you have that compass. What does that look like? So about to jump into a deeper dive of this. Donna, thank you. So if we can look, I've put in here in some italicized text, some examples of coaching conversations that you could ask or ask for yourself if you're working through this as a tool for yourself. So if we start at the top, experiencing positive emotions, looking at, well, how do I create opportunities for myself to feel these positive emotions of love and gratitude and optimism, excitement, passion, awe, and joy? And as we go around, remember it's three-dimensional, the next is, how do I live my values and my goals? And then it's about exercise, sleep, and nutrition. And family and friends, how do I have that close support network? And do I have people that I have those personal relationships with that I can trust, that I share my problems with? And at the bottom here, I've got my South Point is the community integration. And community it's changed, I think, since COVID. It could be, am I connected to an online community? You know, some people, it's about the communities where they're finding it, what makes sense for them. Then there's that connection to nature and spirit. Am I spending 30 minutes a day in nature? Do I feel connected to the spiritual, natural world? And how do I reflect on those beliefs for me? The sense of meaning and purpose, so important for well-being. And then how are you managing those difficult emotions? Am I able to accept these difficult emotions such as sadness and anger? How do I practice those effective coping mechanisms and regulate my emotions? Thank you. So the first question I ask is, where's your compass currently pointing and why? And remembering, when you hold a compass, you can move your hand. Where's the compass pointing? And here are some coaching conversations just to clarify for you to help plan and reflect. What's one small daily habit that you'll develop to help you move to that direction? How can you use your social network to support you to achieve that goal? What are the benefits of some of these new behaviours, and how are you going to track your progress? So again, in some of the documents I've actually provided to Wellbeing Australia, I've got a tool that has the compass picture and also these questions. So please feel free to use those. And I've just popped here some useful resources. Safe Work have some great resources. There's more statistics at the OECD, and also the link to the psychosocial health and safety at work documentation. So I know we've jumped through that quite quickly, but I was really hoping that we were now going to have a bit of a Q&A session, Donna.
Hi, Simone. Thanks so much for that. Really do appreciate that. That was an outstanding introduction, I think, to and raised so many questions regarding well-being and the multidimensional aspects, I think, of well-being. I guess to kick us off for tonight's conversation and dialogue, which will form the format for the rest of our time together this evening. I'm very mindful there are two aspects to coaching for well-being. There's firstly coaching myself on my own well-being, and secondly coaching others. So what is coaching for well-being, and where do I begin?
So I think when you're beginning, it's really about understanding where you are, and if I use the wellbeing compass, looking at that and looking and saying, where is it strong? Where is it pointing? Which direction am I heading in? And then looking and saying, is it balanced? Is it not balanced? And so having that, that's a self-reflection coaching for yourself to begin with. And some of those answers to some of those questions might not be easy or pleasant when you ask them to yourself. But you have to be quite brutally honest with yourself as to where that balance is. And if you've got an imbalance, look at the ways and what are some of those questions. What are some of those small daily habits that you can put in place to start to move that.
Mm-hmm.
Taking what you were saying, how do you look at that then from coaching others? It's really looking and asking in that same way, that asking the questions to allow that person to reflect on themselves. Where is the compass pointing for them? And of those areas, where is it that it doesn't feel like it's balanced? And ask them to articulate why, what's going on for them. How do they feel about that? And what do they want to choose to change?
You're so right, Simone. And I think part of the challenge is very often we see the world through our own lens, right? And so I'm very mindful of the fact that some days when, I'm feeling particularly optimistic or not, my views on others' well-being might be colored by that. Could you maybe speak a little bit about how important one's own well-being is to having those conversations, both with yourself as well as with others, around coaching and addressing the issue of well-being?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things there. When you are looking at yourself, it's, how do you take that balcony view, taking yourself up, out, and looking at holistically your life and looking at all of those components for you. Sometimes we can get a little bit myopic and we can look a little bit too much into just one area, but knowing that they're all balanced is really important. The other thing, going to what you were talking about with the wearing your own glasses, is you can have your own bias about yourself, and sometimes that could be a halo bias and sometimes a horn, and taking that time to actually stop and be really aware and try and just sort of look at your life and your situation and say, if you are working, say, very long hours, and most people know that they're working long hours, what does that mean for the balance of your, are you doing it somewhere that you're really living your goals and your values? If you're working those long hours, what's happening to your home, family time, community time, your connection to nature and spirit? Are you getting that time outside, or are you indoors the whole time working 12, 14-hour days? And people can usually work through what are some small little things that they can put in place. But it takes reflection.
It does. And, I think I'm just so mindful of the fact that when you're tired or things are stressful, how much of an influence that can have, not only on your own perception of yourself and how you're doing, your own confidence, your own sense of well-being, but also might interpret others' well-being and actions in such a different way. And so I would imagine things like fatigue and exhaustion might do that. Are there other things that come to mind for you that would really color one's perception of your own well-being or somebody else's well-being and their ability to be open and interpret that?
So when you have those emotions or the physical reaction of burnout and fatigue, there's actually, if we think of the definition, the World Health Organization definition of burnout, there's actually 3 areas that can happen, first, and very rarely happens in one big leap and one big change. They're incremental. And people start to have that criticism of others, hypercriticism of themselves. So one of the really big important steps is about self-compassion. So that's a really big piece when you're looking at well-being, but also recovery from burnout, or making sure that you are focusing on your well-being. You have to be able to be kind to yourself.
Absolutely. And I think one that we forget all too often sometimes. Simone, I think your analogy of the compass and the dynamic and ever-changing aspect of one's well-being, as well as one's focus and priority of well-being at a time where I think is such a strong and powerful image. There's a question that's come through from somebody who's watching this evening is I think a great one. It's understanding and being able to identify an area where potentially you need to work, and you need to pay some attention, and some area that you would like to focus on. And then what are the steps that you would take once you've identified there's an area that you need to work on?
Yeah. So we could actually, use an example area. It's probably easier to work through it that way. The first would be, if you looked at, exercise, sleep, and nutrition as an example. If you've identified as a 0 to 10, when you move the compass, it's not balanced. It's you're at a very low, onesies, twosies, low levels. Some of those things are like, well, there's those initial bits of, am I providing time for exercise? Am I focusing on that? And then, what are some small activities that I can start to put in place? So, it's really about looking at where are those, the gaps between what you're doing at the moment and what you may also like to achieve to that goal, and then start to look at some of those, some smaller steps that you can put in place. And it could be sleep perspective, could be, going to bed earlier at night, really focus with that. I hear, people will often put times on their phones to identify, wind down time and so on. So it's really about looking at what that actual area is for you, and then you're also looking at, well, what's been holding you back? What's been the barrier to achieving that wellbeing measure? There's no point saying I'm going to put a timer on my phone if, you've got a baby that gets you up every 2 hours. Like, you've got to kind of choose also the right type of intervention or approach that's going to be suitable for your situation.
Yeah. What you mentioned is a really interesting nuance to it as well, Simone, in that it's about sort of topping up and balancing, as opposed to, getting to a 10 out of 10 on 3 and then being able to ignore them, I guess. And as you were presenting that, I was thinking about, my own well-being. There's some of the aspects of that are more important for some people than others, right? So, for some, it may be areas around the physical, and that unless you hear people saying, unless I go for my daily run, or I can't function, and especially people who have high energy levels, unless they have that physical outlet every single day, they just don't feel that they can function in other ways, and concentrate on other things. Whereas for others, it's the social, it's potentially the connection, etc. And I think what you're speaking to, which I found very interesting, and I'd love your thoughts on, is, where do you then focus? Because say out of those multi-dimensions, you've got 3 that you're good on, 3 that you feel are pretty weak, and 5 in the middle. So how do you approach that? How would you recommend to somebody, as you're coaching them on their own well-being, do they look at that and sort of really do an audit, I guess, against those various aspects? And where should they focus? Is it on the weak ones first, or is it on some of the middly ones that they want to improve, or is it on keeping the strong ones going?
That is a very good question. And the answer is probably, it depends. Because every situation, every individual is different. And, what I would start with is actually taking that balcony view and looking at all of the compass and say, well, are some of those areas linked in an, is it actually, because they are associated. So that order that things are in the compass is really relevant. So, I would look, if you saw sort of that the top one of the top quadrants was looking like that was pretty low, I'd be thinking, well, hang on, what's going on here? And maybe though it's something that an individual isn't that bothered by, putting a lot of attention and energy into coaching to increase those areas, if it's not something that they're interested in or it's going to make a massive difference to them, would be a discussion I think you would have with that individual and client. But generally, as I say, I would want to take that step back and have a look at the whole picture, and then you would look and then have a discussion of what area or which of the areas do they feel is maybe the biggest gap for them between what they currently have and what their desire is. Because that is where you start to build in motivation, where people are already motivated to close that gap. So they would be the areas I would tend to start with, rather than necessarily just focusing on, is it a 0 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 type of sort of number.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I think sort of looking at, as you say, the quadrants differently, but also being able to choose, which one, where am I going to begin on the ones that I need to work on? And I suppose also comes back to what you were saying earlier, is which do you feel is important to you, but then also that you actually can affect in the current environment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like there are things that you can change, and there are other things in everyone's lives that you can't change, but everyone would have quite different components of those and what that looks like for them. Using the example, if you've got very, very young children, well, there are some things you can't change, and usually it's that they wake up at 6 a.m, regardless of what time they go to sleep. And then when you get to teenagers, they're in bed until midday. But the bit that you can change is what's important to you and how do you approach which area, and looking at ones that you can have some success in, I think is also a key criteria that is important.
And Simone, in your experience and practice, when you are coaching people on their well-being, how many areas do you think people can generally focus on at once? What's a good number? Because, I would imagine that out of all of those aspects, ones you want to keep working on, ones you need to improve, and ones which you really feel you're lacking. So as a general principle, how do you guide people through that discussion and decision as to, is it 2, is it 4, is it 1 that you really need to focus on in order to make a substantial impact on your well-being?
So again, with that, taking that holistic view, I always like to look for the patterns, because what I tend to find is that there are themes that will weave in and out, and there'll be a few areas that will have those themes, and it might then have that sort of external to that individual impact and influence. So looking at that, and then from that, looking at sort of 2, no more than 3, looking at initially what that might look like. So, and I've just seen one of the questions come up, so one of the themes that, and I can talk about a client that just yesterday is about, for them, the imposter phenomena for them. And so not feeling that they have had that control, feeling that they're always, balancing or misbalancing areas of their life. That's the theme that I've seen for them. But as a result, it's impacted their living their values and goals, and the amount of exercise and sleep that they were getting. So that's where I tend to see things grouped together on the compass.
Fascinating. And you've touched on it a couple of times, Simone. I'd love to hear a little more about spirituality and why you think it's so fundamental to one's well-being.
Yeah. So, and it's not something that people want to necessarily talk openly about in a lot of forums, but having that awareness of linking to your spirituality doesn't necessarily mean going to a church of whichever religion that is, but it's linking to that higher purpose, and it's linking to the pathway of meaning. So whether it's the pathway then for, with linking to the work with gratitude, quite often that spirituality links people in with community, with positivity, with the sense of being thankful for themselves giving to others their role. So all of those things come together in part of that well-being. It's so important because then you can look from not just inside yourself but outside, and bringing those together into looking at your well-being is about the heart and the mind and the whole body linking.
You're so right. And I think we very often hear, especially in people on, older, later on in their life, and older people, where they really are asking what their purpose is and what the purpose of their life and how they can contribute. And it seems to become such an absolutely fundamental aspect of one's sense of self and well-being, is understanding your purpose in life, whether you're there to take care of grandchildren and contribute in that way, or whether it's playing a pivotal role, as you say, in volunteering or charity. Such a fundamental aspect. And do you see that often in the conversations that you have, that sense of importance and understanding of their deeper purpose?
I would hazard to say that meaning and purpose comes up, almost in every client coaching engagement. And I don't just see it in people at an older end of the career or their life. I'm actually seeing it, and I'm working with quite a few young adults, and I see a lot where it's, what's my purpose? Why am I doing, I get these questions, why am I doing these, the HSC or, and here in the ACT system, well, what's it all for? I don't know what my purpose, I don't know what I want in life. What am I here for? And if they're so focused, or I see them are so focused on the study and then not having the rest of their well-being, their connection with others, that's really important to really balance people's lives, and where I see things being more successful is people having that time out to play a sport, to balance, the family dinner, Sunday dinner, have their community, their friends, they're managing their positive and negative emotions, but they really understand, because they've got all of those balancing, they can focus on, well, what am I doing this for? What would I like to do? What's my purpose in doing my work? Career-wise, is it working with people? Do I want to work in academia? Do I love numbers? There are lots of questions that you would work through, particularly when you're looking at careers. But really balancing all of that is really important, so that people can look at purpose and their values.
You're so right. And I think one of the other areas that I often think about when we talk about the spirituality dimension, which is becoming increasingly, I think, important and divisive in society, is the idea of ethics and our values. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit about those. I think in some professions, it's you're more likely to run into areas where ethics and values may be at odds with somebody else or with the organization that you work for, which causes such a deep sense of lack of well-being and challenge. And I think in other areas, we've seen more recently people who feel so fundamentally passionate about things like the environment, justice, animal welfare, those type of things, and how important that is to their overall sense of well-being. It seems to evoke a lot of emotion and get people really fired up. And so those sense of what the right ethics and values are those also part of spirituality, or is that something different?
So I think that they're part of when you are unpacking, having that awareness, looking deeper than yourself. Part of those actions and activities help you to then identify what are those values that are important for you. And that becomes a lot more kind of usually more crunchy crystallized as you tend to get older. But sometimes that just also, you need to experience something that is challenging for you to be able to then work through, well, why was that challenging to me, and what are then my values and ethics? That I value the environmental, using your example, the environmental impact of something more than the monetary financial impact. So what happens if you have those that are not in balance is that it causes that dissonance inside you. And the important thing, I think, is when we're looking at coaching someone through well-being, if this comes up, is looking at what it is. What are those behaviors? What is it that is causing you that discomfort, so that you can work through understanding what your personal values are, and making sure that you're then living within those values. Because if you don't live within your values, it will cause that dissonance, right? If you have to live, your values really don't fit within an organization that you're working with, then you would need to really start to have some serious conversations about, actually, is this the right fit for me? Is it the right career for me? What does this mean? Otherwise, it would be impacting your happiness, your satisfaction with what you're doing.
Absolutely. We've got some great questions coming through from our audience here, Simone. One is, what would be one thing you would suggest to somebody who is struggling with their sense of meaning and purpose?
So the first would be looking at what's their environment that they're in at the moment, and then what is their desired environment, and look at what that gap is. And from that you could say, well, is it that socially, you haven't got enough agency with what you're doing individually or within the environment you're in? Is it that your well-being is unbalanced? What is it about the gap, or that there would be, you would have a sense of meaning, but maybe it's not clear. And so maybe it's about putting the magnifying glass on that and looking at what it is, so that you can find what's really important. What's the one important thing that you've currently got out of your situation that helps you to move to more meaning, a more meaningful life.
I imagine also, Simone, that we have a sense of purpose. We have a number of sense of purpose in various aspects of our lives, like work or the family. Our purpose in the family may be very different from our purpose in the community or our purpose at work. Do those all contribute to our overall sense of purpose? Can we have one area, for example, work, where we don't have a strong sense of purpose, but still in the other areas we do, and that's okay? Or do we need to have a strong purpose in each?
I think that understanding what is meaningful for you and how that then enables you to find satisfaction from purpose is probably the important question, because it may be, as you said, that you could say, well, I'm not finding a lot of satisfaction in that work environment, but there is something that satisfies me, because maybe it's I can earn X amount of dollars, and because I'm working, this time, between this time and this time, maybe it's school hours, so that then I can go and after 4 o'clock, I have 2 hours of which I do this activity, which is where I find satisfies all of my desires and my purpose of what I'm doing. I think that's really important, rather than looking and saying I need to have really defined purpose in every activity that I do.
Excellent. Wonderful. Another question that's come through is, how do you choose a wellbeing coach?
Well, a little bit biased, but I think choosing somebody who has an evidence-based background, like it's certainly people who have the qualifications in coaching psychology, I believe is the pinnacle, but also people who have then shown that commitment to ethical practices, whether it's the International Coaching Federation and have membership and professional accreditation through bodies like that. But also really looking and asking someone, well, what are your methodologies? What are, your scientifically validated materials that you use? And if someone can't explain that to you, then you should be looking a bit more critically at who they are and what they're doing. There's a lot more recently of media coming out about quite unscrupulous people in the coaching industry, because currently in Australia it's unregulated. So it's really important that you have that buyer beware, and making sure that you check references, you check their academic qualifications, and maybe even check for, what have they got in their contracts? Do they have the right processes and procedures in place for an ethical business?
Good points. Simone, I wondered if we could change gears a little. We've spoken a lot until now about one's own well-being and coaching yourself through that and finding a coach for that. In the last sort of 10 minutes, I was wondering, a lot of people, especially given the recent changes in legislation, are finding in the work environment that part of their roles and responsibility is to ensure the well-being of others. So what would you say are some of the best ways you can approach conversations about others' well-being and coaching them on their well-being? And how do those differ in different settings? For example, work, home. So for example, how do you approach that conversation with somebody who you're working with, or potentially who's working for you, as opposed to your teenage son?
Well, I don't know about others, but I have a teenage son, and at the moment I get grunts when I ask questions. So, and that's coming to me. So, but if we go back to when I put forward just a couple of slides, one of the ones I talked about was psychological safety versus psychosocial safety and psychosocial risks. And before you can jump into the conversations about psychosocial risks, it actually means starting in that building psychological safety. And quite often I see people trying to jump into really deep conversations really quickly. But if you haven't built trust, and you haven't built some conversations with people in the team where people feel that they can share that information, that you will do something positive with that information, then you're probably really going to struggle to have a meaningful conversation about well-being. So the first thing I would be doing is looking and saying, how do I build trust? How do I start to understand the people that I'm working with? So looking at, well, what are their motivators? What is it that gives them energy? I'm looking at what's their personality and how are they showing up in the team? And then from that, start to build that ability for people to have that trust, to start encouraging the not just feedback, but feed forward processes, so that people are starting to share and talk. And then from that, you could start to ask some of those more deeper questions about how are they finding that balance between their family, because you know who their family are. You know what the challenges are for that person in their life, rather than just asking them, oh, do you have any challenges?
Right. Yeah. And you're so right. The conversation and the relationship is so much broader than that, and they have to feel safe and in that environment to share that information.
Yeah.
Another aspect that comes to mind is the recent changes in legislation, Simone, and I think it's a lot of people in the workplace that I speak to are still catching up and trying to understand what that means for me, or my responsibility as a manager, looking after the well-being of others. Could you maybe just explain a little bit more about that?
So particularly the changes are that what they've brought it forward and have put some criminal liabilities in place under the Work Health and Safety Act. So actually these requirements were there. They've been there for a long time. It's just that now it's getting some more momentum because it's a little bit more crunchy for people if you don't provide a psychologically safe workplace. So, there's a lot of things that people will start to see. And I'm here again and again, it's that overwork. People are and they're exhausted, and exhaustion in the work they're doing. It's the job design, and not keep throwing extra tasks on extra tasks. One of the things I like to ask in a coaching conversation, and I think all leaders and managers can do this too, is there are three things. What is it that you're going to stop doing? What are you going to continue doing? And what are you going to start doing? And if the answer is you stop doing nothing or one thing, but you start doing 10 or 20, that's actually quite clear that you're going to start building towards some significant psychosocial risk of overwork. And so maybe then it's looking at control measures that are organizational redesign, job redesign, team redesign, but it's even things like people having the autonomy to make decisions, letting, as a team, as a manager, not saying I need to be the hero and make all the decisions. And part of that then builds that self-determination, which builds that psychological psychosocial safety and also psychological safety.
And having that sense that you've got some control over what's coming at you. I think it's so fascinating as well. I think we often feel in the work environment that we can't say no as a team or as an individual. And it's so interesting how once you do say, well, if we take that on, what else has to come off because I'm at full capacity? So often people respect you for that and respect that conversation, and then it becomes a transparent conversation rather than not saying, well then I won't be able to have time or capacity to get to this or that. So I do think
you start to get to the point where people are not having lunch breaks because or they're missing important events for their family or for them, medical appointments and so on, because they're working too much. That's absolutely, a sign of psychosocial risks.
Yeah. Well, fascinating. We could speak about it all night, I'm sure. And so many of the aspects you've touched on, Simone, include the importance of leadership in this context, and not only leaders and managers of the business, but also your own leadership in taking control of that situation, communicating effectively, negotiating what that looks like, so that you feel it's manageable and in control for you. But that is a whole different topic. We'll have to get you back to speak about a different time, is the importance of that sense of you know, your well-being, and how that leads into your style and approach as a leader. Just before we wrap up this evening, Simone, another question which I'd love to ask is, where can I read or learn more? Are there resources, are there tools that I can access in order to better understand and continue this conversation about coaching for well-being?
Yeah. So there are, I've put some information, I will put some more information up on my website in the next day or so. There are other really amazing professional providers in the wellbeing, positive psychology space, including Dr. Michelle McQuaid, and she does some really fantastic work. There's also some really interesting work being done and data that you can get out of the OECD on wellbeing, and you know, please also have a look at Wellbeing Australia's website, because I have sent through a few documents, and if there was, you know, people asking questions and wanting anything else, I'm really happy to pull some things together and make some of that available.
Oh, thank you so much, Simone. That is so generous of you. And for those of you on the line, we do have some resources that Simone has very kindly offered to share with us. And so we are posting those onto our website. And we will also make a recording of this evening's dialogue and conversation and presentation available. And in the link beneath that on YouTube, we will put all the links to those resources. So thank you so much, Simone, for your wisdom, your insights, your experience, and for making us think so much more about our own well-being and how we coach that in others in our lives. Really, really do appreciate you giving up your time and expertise. And I think I speak on behalf of everybody online to say thank you. It really was an outstanding discussion, and one that I'm sure we will come back to a number of times. For those of you who are online, you will see that we've got a slide up. If any of tonight's discussion has generated any emotion for you that you feel you may need some support on, here's a list of some really good resources and places where you could speak to somebody if you would like. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for your time and attention this evening. We hope you have a wonderful evening and come back for more of these discussions in the future. Simone, on behalf of Wellbeing Australia and all of our audience, thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thank you.